Back in 2014, I went on a first date with a guy I met on Tinder, and to this day, it remains one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had. I was living in Washington, D.C. back then, working long, exhausting hours on Capitol Hill for a congressman. My job basically consumed my entire life. There were weeks where I barely saw sunlight, let alone had time for dating. But my best friend had been relentless for months, constantly begging me to at least try Tinder. I finally gave in, half just to shut her up. That's how I matched with this guy. He called himself a Southern gentleman, which sounded charming at first. He was good-looking, well-dressed, and seemed intelligent. But right away, something about him felt off. He was incredibly pushy about meeting up. I'd told him more than once that work was crazy, that I couldn't get away, but he'd always find a way to make me feel bad, saying things like, "You can't be that busy," or "Just one drink, you deserve a break." Eventually, after weeks of back and forth, I got worn down and agreed to meet him for dinner. On paper, the date went fine. The restaurant was nice, the food was good, and he seemed perfectly polite to anyone watching us. But the entire time, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. He had this way of staring at me, not just looking, but staring, like he was studying every blink, every word that came out of my mouth. He almost never broke eye contact. It made me feel like I was under some kind of microscope, and no matter how I shifted in my chair or looked away, his eyes would just follow. After dinner, I thanked him and said I needed to go home because I had an early start the next morning. He smiled, but instead of saying goodbye, he suggested we grab a drink at the bar next door. I tried to decline, but he pushed again, using that same guilt-trip tone he'd used before the date. It was like he didn't hear the word no. Eventually, I gave in, mostly because I didn't want to create a scene. We went next door, and I ended up sitting there while he talked endlessly about himself. I sipped my drink slowly, hoping to finish quickly so I could leave. When I told him I really needed to get going, he ignored me and went to the bar to order another round. He didn't even ask. That's when I started to realize this guy didn't see me as a person, just something he could control for the night. By the time he brought back the beers, I'd had enough. I faked an incoming call from my boss and put on what I swear was the best acting performance of my life. I pretended it was a work emergency, apologized, and stood up to leave. Finally, it worked. He seemed to accept it. But then he insisted on calling an Uber for us, to make sure I got home safe. I told him it wasn't necessary, that I'd just call one myself, but he wouldn't let it go. He said we could share it since our neighborhoods were sort of in the same direction. I didn't want him knowing where I lived, but I also didn't know how to get out of it without escalating things, so I reluctantly agreed. I told the driver to drop me off a few blocks from my actual place, hoping that would be enough. When the Uber stopped, I thanked him and got out quickly, trying to make it look casual. But before I could even take a step, he followed me out, grabbed my shoulder, and spun me around. Then he kissed me, if you can even call it that. It was aggressive and disgusting, the kind of kiss that feels like an assault. I pulled away, pretending to laugh it off, just trying to de-escalate and get rid of him. After a few awkward words, he finally got back into the car, and I waited until he was out of sight before sprinting to my actual apartment and locking every door behind me. I remember sitting on the floor afterward, shaking, just trying to process what had happened. It was like I'd spent the entire evening trying to politely escape a trap. I told my roommates about it later, trying to joke that at least I'd survived my first and last date with that guy. But underneath the sarcasm, I was genuinely scared. I figured that was the end of it. But a few hours later, my phone started lighting up with messages. He sent me paragraph after paragraph about how amazing the night was, how much chemistry he felt, how he couldn't stop thinking about me. Then came the FaceTime requests, several of them, all within an hour. I ignored everything and lied, saying I'd gone to bed early. The next day he texted again, and the day after that. I started replying with short, polite answers just to avoid conflict, but it didn't help. Then something happened that made everything worse. A few days later, while I was at work, I got a call from the Capitol Hill Package Screening Center. They said they had a delivery for me that had passed through security and would arrive later that week. I wasn't expecting anything, but it wasn't that unusual for staffers to get mail, so I didn't think much of it. That Friday, our receptionist came to my desk holding a massive bouquet of red roses. My stomach dropped before I even looked at the card. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from, but I did anyway. The note was just as bad as I'd feared, long, rambling, and creepy. He talked about how I was the best kisser he'd ever had, how he wanted me to meet his family, how we were meant to be. The whole thing made my skin crawl. What terrified me most wasn't the words themselves, though. It was how he'd found me. I had never told him my last name, never mentioned where I worked, never even said which congressman I worked for. My social media was locked down, my profiles were private, and there were literally thousands of staffers on the Hill. There was no reason he should have been able to figure any of that out. And yet somehow, he did. After that, I blocked his number, deleted every message, and told my office's security team what had happened. I didn't sleep much that weekend. For weeks, I found myself looking over my shoulder every time I left the office. Eventually, he stopped trying to contact me, but that experience stuck with me. It changed how I handled people like him. I stopped feeling guilty about being direct, stopped pretending to be polite when someone crossed a line. If someone made me uncomfortable, I cut them off without explanation. Because now I knew what could happen when you ignored your instincts just to avoid hurting someone's feelings. I've been a nudist for most of my adult life. It's not really something I bring up in everyday conversation, but it's a big part of who I am. For those who don't know, most nudists go to private resorts or campgrounds where nudity is allowed, since public nudity isn't exactly legal or socially accepted in most places. These resorts are usually tucked away in rural areas, surrounded by woods or farmland, far from curious eyes. The place I went to last summer was one of those secluded ones, a small campground spread over a few acres of land, bordered by miles of forest and rolling hills. I'd planned to stay for 3 nights, from Monday to Wednesday. Those are usually the quietest days, which I liked. Fewer people around, less noise. After checking in, I dropped my bag off at the cabin and decided to head to the pool for a swim. It was a perfect July day. Blue sky, warm sun, cicadas buzzing in the trees. I remember floating on my back, staring at the clouds, when I noticed something strange. Up on the hill behind the campground, just beyond the tree line, was a man. He was standing completely still, facing right toward me. That wouldn't have been all that weird, except he was fully clothed. Now, this particular campground wasn't clothing optional like most nudist spots. It was nude only. That meant everyone there, except for workers doing maintenance, had to be naked. The rules were strict, so seeing a clothed man just standing there immediately put me on edge. He was wearing jeans and a black hoodie, with the hood pulled up, on an 85-degree day. He didn't move. He just stood there, hands in his pocket, staring. At first, I told myself he was probably just a maintenance worker taking a break. But something about the way he stood there, so rigid, like he was studying me, made my stomach twist. I grabbed my towel, got dressed, and went straight to the office. 2 older women worked there, and they knew me from my previous visits, so when I told them what I'd seen, they took me seriously. They followed me back to the pool. Of course, when we got there, the man was gone. I was only gone for maybe 2 minutes, so he must have seen me leave and slipped into the woods. We went up the hill to look for him, but found nothing. I figured maybe he was just some local who wandered a little too far down the public trails. Creepy, yeah, but harmless. By the time evening came, I'd mostly forgotten about it. My cabin was near the trail, kind of isolated from the others. It was small but cozy, just enough room for a bed, a little table, and a bathroom. The walls were thin, though. I could hear every cricket and gust of wind outside. The closest person to me was a guy named Sam, a friendly middle-aged man who lived there full-time in his trailer with his 2 daughters. Their place was maybe 150 feet away. That night, around 10 or so, I was lying in bed reading when I heard it, soft crunching in the grass. At first, I thought it was Sam going out for a smoke, but the footsteps were slow, deliberate, almost careful. I froze. It was too quiet outside for someone just walking by. I went to the window and lifted the blinds just enough to peek through. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then, just at the edge of the darkness, I caught a glimpse of someone moving. My heart started pounding. It was a man, walking toward Sam's trailer. He wasn't pale like Sam, and he wasn't naked like everyone else at the campground. I could barely see him, but the dark hoodie and jeans told me all I needed to know. It was the same guy from the hill. And then it hit me. Sam's 2 daughters were in that trailer. They were maybe 8 and 10 years old. This guy wasn't just some curious hiker. He'd been watching, waiting, maybe for them. I grabbed my phone and called Sam. No answer. I called again, and again. Each time it rang out, I felt more panicked. I peeked out the blinds again, just in time to see the man stepping onto a box by the trailer and looking through one of the windows. I knew I had to do something. I didn't even bother putting on clothes, just threw on my hiking boots and bolted out the door. But before I could even yell, I heard it. A scream, high-pitched, terrified, coming from the trailer. Then the lights came on. The man was climbing out the window, and before I could even process what was happening, he started running toward the woods. I took off after him. I could hear Sam yelling something behind me, then his footsteps joining mine. The man's jeans flashed between the trees ahead of us, but he was fast, way faster than either of us. We chased him deep into the trail until he disappeared completely. Breathing hard, I stopped and turned to Sam. His face was pale, his hands shaking. We ran back to his trailer, where his daughters were crying, trying to explain what happened. A few other campers had come out of their cabins, flashlights in hand. I called the police while Sam tried to comfort his kids. It took nearly half an hour for the police to arrive. They went into the woods with flashlights and dogs, but found nothing. The man was gone. No one ever found out who he was, or how long he'd been watching that campground. Sam sold his trailer a few weeks later and moved out with his daughters. The campground has since put up a tall fence around the property and hired volunteers to patrol at night, but I haven't been back since. Even now, when I think about that man standing on the hill, watching in silence, I wonder how many times he'd been there before any of us ever noticed him. Before I get into what happened, it's probably good to explain a bit about our house. It used to belong to 2 different families, which means both the ground and first floors have their own kitchens and bathrooms. There's also a basement that connects directly to the garage. For a long time, my wife and I didn't really use the first floor kitchen or bathroom until 2018, when our son was born. After that, running downstairs in the middle of the night became exhausting, so we started using the upstairs space more often. That's when things started to get weird. At first, it was small stuff. We'd wake up and notice the office door downstairs was wide open, or find a chair moved out of place, a cup sitting in the bathroom, or plates in the living room. It was strange, but we brushed it off. We were both exhausted, running on little sleep, and our house was total chaos with a newborn. We'd had episodes of sleepwalking before, so it was easy to blame it on that. And with 3 cats running around, there was always a convenient excuse. Then came the sounds. My wife mentioned several times that she'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear noises downstairs, soft thumps, creaks, things shifting. I heard them too on a few occasions, but again, we had cats. It was always easier to explain it away than to face the idea that something might actually be wrong. Then one evening, my wife swore she saw someone's hand on the lower stairs as she walked by. She said it was quick, just a glimpse of a shadowy hand, then nothing. We joked that it must have been a trick of the light, or her half-asleep brain playing games. Still, something about it stuck with me. But the moment that changed everything came a few weeks later. We found a red winter hat in the downstairs bathroom, tucked between the bathtub and washing machine. Neither of us recognized it. We'd had friends and family visit to meet our son, but no one claimed it, even after we sent pictures. That night, we double-checked every door and window, but deep down, I don't think it really hit us that something serious might be going on. It was easier to stay in denial, to tell ourselves that stuff like this just doesn't happen to people like us. Then, by sheer luck, something fell into our laps. A friend of mine was upgrading her home security system and offered me her old cameras. They weren't perfect. The footage sometimes cut out, but they worked. I figured, why not? I set a few of them up that same night. The next morning, after checking the footage, I felt my stomach drop. Around midnight, 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, entered our house through the basement. One man and the woman looked young, maybe early 20s. He had tattoos covering his hands, and she had long hair in a braid, wearing a loose dress and carrying a big gym bag. The third man was older, probably in his 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, easily someone who could have overpowered both me and my wife. The footage showed the younger 2 wandering around the ground floor, almost casually, while the older man disappeared upstairs, for over an hour. We had no camera up there, so we still don't know what he was doing. When we saw that, we called the police right away. My brother and father-in-law moved in for a while after that, and we had every lock in the house replaced. With the police, we went through the basement, which only had 2 small, mostly empty rooms. There's one window down there, too small for anyone but a cat to fit through, and it's covered by metal grates. That's when we realized the only possible entrance was the garage. Our garage door was unlocked. We didn't know if one of us had left it that way, or if those people had somehow figured out how to open it. The police later told us they found fingerprints all over it, but couldn't confirm anything else. And just like that, the mystery made a lot more sense. These people had been getting in through the garage the whole time, coming and going whenever they wanted. Since we didn't have a car and used the garage for storage, we rarely went in there, so we never noticed. For a while after that, the police stayed in close contact. They patrolled the neighborhood and updated us on their investigation. We found out that the older man matched the description of someone who had assaulted a gas station cashier across town, but no one knew his name. He wasn't in the database, and the other 2 were never identified. Eventually, the police visits stopped, and we just had to move on. A few months later, we woke up one night to a loud bang outside. We called the police again, but nothing came of it. No one was found, nothing stolen, no new evidence. We still live in the same house today, though it feels different now. Every door and window has been replaced. The basement gets locked up tight every night, and we've added more cameras, motion sensors, and most importantly, a big dog. Our 3 cats, by the way, turned out to be totally useless in all of this. The footage showed them walking around those strangers like they were old friends. Looking back, my wife and I can laugh about some parts of it now, but for a long time, it really messed with us. We spent months replaying what-if scenarios in our heads, thinking about all the nights we could have gone downstairs and run into those people. My wife couldn't even go into the basement alone for over a year. Honestly, I still get uneasy down there sometimes. Having a baby at the time made the guilt even worse. But over the years, we've managed to find some peace again. Still, I don't think I'll ever completely shake the thought of how easily strangers were walking through our home while we slept upstairs, completely unaware. About 8 months ago, I found out something that's been sitting in the back of my mind ever since. It's one of those things that doesn't really make sense no matter how many times you think it over. To start, I need to explain something about myself. When I was little, I had a pretty severe speech delay. I didn't say a single word until just before kindergarten, and even after that, I had a speech impediment that's still there a bit today, just not as noticeable. Luckily, the sounds I struggle with happen to line up with certain accents, so people tend to think I'm British or Australian, depending on who you ask. I've honestly just gone with it over the years. It's easier to play along than to explain the whole speech thing and deal with awkward questions or pity looks. The only people who actually know the truth are close friends and my family. So anyway, at the time this happened, I was dating this girl. We'll call her Mia, and we were both 18. Things between us are over now, but not for any bad reason. One night we went to this social get-together, and there we ran into one of her friends, someone I technically already knew from high school. I didn't know her well, though. We'd just been in the same grade. We all started talking as a group, just the usual catching up and random small talk, when completely out of nowhere, Mia's friend turned to me and asked how my mom was doing. It threw me off immediately. It's not the kind of thing you just ask unless you actually know the person's mom. So I laughed awkwardly and said something like, why? Do you know her?" And this girl nods and says that my mom used to be her educational assistant back in elementary and middle school, and that she helped her with her behavioral issues when she was younger. Now, this made zero sense to me. My mom did work in a school for a short time, but she was just a lunchtime supervisor, and it was at a completely different elementary school, definitely not the one this girl went to. I told her that, but she just smiled and said she was sure it was my mom because she used to talk about you all the time. Then she added that when she was deciding which high school to attend, my mom had suggested mine because that's where her daughter went. That's when I started thinking there might have been some mix-up. My name isn't exactly rare. It's pretty much as basic as you can get, so I figured maybe this girl's EA had a daughter with the same name as me. But then she said something that froze me. She said, "No, it was definitely you." She told me about your speech therapy and how proud she was that you were doing so much better. I just sat there for a second trying to process that. Because here's the thing. I don't tell people about my speech therapy. Ever. I've mentioned having a bit of an accent or speech issue, but never the fact that I went to therapy for it. It's not a story I share, not even with people I'm close to. So the fact that this girl knew about it meant whoever was pretending to be my mom knew personal details from my childhood. Things that were never public, never online, nothing. To make sure I wasn't losing it, I asked her what my mom looked like. She said she was short, with curly brown hair. That stopped me cold. My real mom is tall and blonde. But that description? It perfectly matched my first speech therapist, the one I had when I was in kindergarten and first grade. It suddenly made sense in the most disturbing way possible. My first speech therapist had apparently been telling people she was my mother, and based on what that girl said, she'd been talking about me years after I'd stopped seeing her, enough to know where I went to high school, which means, at some point, she must have looked me up or kept tabs on me somehow. The realization freaked me out more than I wanted to admit. I hadn't seen that woman since I was a little kid. Why would she be telling people she was my mom? And how much did she actually know about my life now? While I was thinking about all this later that night, another memory came back to me. Something that didn't seem weird at the time but feels different now. When I was a kid, not long after I switched therapists, my mom and I were at a store. There was this shiny blue guitar, and I was obsessed with it. My mom said no, of course. It was expensive, and I'd never shown much interest in playing guitar anyway. But then, out of nowhere, my old speech therapist showed up in the same store and bought it for me. My mom told her it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. At the time, it felt like an incredibly kind thing to do. Now, knowing what I know, it doesn't sit right at all. I still don't know what to make of any of this. I don't even remember her full name, so there's not much I can do about it. I live in the city now, but when I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time visiting my grandma's house with my dad. My cousins were almost always around too, so the house was kind of like our little headquarters. We'd play outside, run around the neighborhood, and basically get into mischief whenever we could. There was this park nearby where we spent most of our afternoons, but just past it, there was an abandoned club that always caught my eye. Back in its prime, the place had been really popular, but by the time I was a kid, it was completely trashed. Broken windows, a shattered front door, graffiti covering the walls, and just this heavy, eerie silence about it. Even during the day, it gave off this off vibe, like something about the place wasn't right. It was tucked between trees, so shadows hung over it all the time, making it feel even creepier. I always wanted to go inside, but I never had the guts, and honestly, I didn't want to be that kid getting in trouble or worse. When I was around 13 or 14, one of my friends from school, who had moved abroad, came back for the summer. Every time he visited, we'd try to get into something ridiculous, just to kill time. That year, we got bored and started talking about the abandoned club. He was braver than me, always had been, and he said, "We should check it out tonight. I'll go first. There's no way you're going to be the one to lead." I laughed, tried to back out, but he was serious. I didn't have a better idea, and against my better judgment, I agreed. It was about 10 o'clock when we rode our bikes over there. The night was pitch black, with only a couple of street lamps spaced far apart. The road leading up to the club felt like it was swallowing us in shadows. When we got to the entrance, I froze for a moment, staring at the broken glass and dark windows. It was quiet, too quiet, and the air felt heavy, like the building itself was watching us. We finally climbed over the jagged doorway and squeezed inside, using our phone flashlights. The place was a complete mess. Garbage and old bags littered the floor, furniture was tipped over, and there were even needles scattered near the walls. The interior felt huge but chaotic, with weird paths and hallways that looped in circles for no reason. Every little sound echoed, and we immediately went quiet, creeping along as if we might wake something sleeping inside. We were examining the bar when I realized my friend wasn't behind me anymore. My stomach dropped. 1 second he was there, the next, gone. I spun around, flashlight swinging, and called his name, but nothing. Then suddenly something hit me from behind. I screamed and stumbled forward, and it turned out it was him, laughing so hard he was doubled over. My heart was still racing and I was furious, but relieved. That's when I heard it, another laugh, softer at first, then louder. It wasn't my friend. My blood ran cold. I swung the flashlight toward the sound and saw him. A man. Tall, thin, with long, messy hair and filthy clothes. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the outline of his grin in the light. He hadn't been there a second ago. I didn't hesitate. I screamed again and bolted for the door, my friend right behind me. We jumped on our bikes and pedaled as hard as we could, hearts hammering, until we reached my grandma's house. Once inside, we finally stopped and tried to catch our breath. Later, we tried to piece together what had happened. How had he gotten so close without a sound? Every step we took in that place had felt loud enough to echo, yet he was right behind us. And the way he laughed with us, like it was part of some twisted joke, made it feel like he had been watching us the whole time. My friend and I had been drinking at a friend's place and were both pretty wasted by the time we decided to leave. It was around 5 a.m. The streets were quiet, empty, and the city felt completely asleep. We hopped on the first bus we saw and made our way to the back, trying to keep it low-key and not attract attention. That's when we noticed him. A man, probably around 60, wearing this ridiculous floppy hat, immediately turned to my friend and said, "You're really good looking." My friend laughed nervously and thanked him, not thinking much of it. But then he got up and moved closer, sitting right next to me. Suddenly, it didn't feel casual anymore. He smelled of alcohol and had this weird, intense energy about him. He started asking my friend for a drink from their bag. My friend gave him one, but then he started asking questions. Their name, which stop they'd be getting off at. Over and over again, even after my friend said they didn't want to answer. At first, I laughed it off nervously, hoping he'd leave us alone. But something about the way he repeated the questions, like he wasn't hearing us, made my stomach drop. Then a group of younger guys noticed what was happening. They stepped in, telling the man to back off. He grumbled, but eventually moved away, giving the drink back. A verbal fight broke out between him and the younger men, insults flying, drunken shouting, but my friend and I just kept our heads down. Once the bus stopped, we thanked the guys and hurried off, hearts pounding, thinking the worst was over. We walked to the tram stop, trying to calm down, laughing nervously at how ridiculous the night had gotten. But then I saw him, the man from the bus, walking straight toward the tram doors. My stomach dropped. He had followed us. There was no way he just happened to be there. When he got on, he walked directly to us. His fists were clenched, and his face had this wild, angry look. I thought he was going to hit me. I raised my arm instinctively to protect myself, but instead, he sat down very close, leaning toward us and muttering about the younger guys from the bus. He said he would kill them and that he knew where they lived. My friend and I exchanged a quick, panicked glance and decided to get off at the next stop, or rather, one stop earlier than planned, to make sure we could lose him. As soon as the doors opened, we bolted. We ran through a dim walkway, hiding behind trees and bushes where we could still see the tram in the distance. We stayed silent, waiting until we were sure he hadn't followed us. Finally, we cut through a forest path that led to my friend's place. Every rustle of leaves made my heart jump. Every shadow felt like him coming after us. When we finally got inside, locked the door, and collapsed on the couch, the relief hit like a punch. We were alive, safe, but absolutely shaken. That night had shown us just how quickly something that seemed harmless could spiral into real danger.